Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
We're coming into the middle of this story. Like, we know this story, right? We know what's going on. The 7 years of abundance that the land of Egypt enjoyed came to an end, and the 7 years of famine set in. Ra'av, right? Hunger. Just as Joseph had foretold. There was famine in all the lands, but throughout the land of Egypt there was bread. So there's famine. There had been famine around Egypt, but Egypt had known 7 years of, great crops, and that now comes to an end. How does Egypt get irrigated? From the Nile. So the Nile goes from lower Egypt to upper Egypt, right? So it flows, which is completely counterintuitive to me. So the rain that falls in the Sudan, right? It then comes down and comes down from the Blue Nile into the Nile, and that is what raises the level of the Nile so that it then irrigates all the crops of Upper Egypt.
Okay? It flows north. Yes, that's what you said. Yes. It flows north.
Yeah, it flows. If I look at a map, it flows up, which makes me crazy. But I get it that really the map needs to be flat, and you use a topographical. I get it, but I'm a little linear sometimes. So from lower Egypt, upper Egypt is watered. In ancient times, we know already there was a very, very sophisticated system of irrigation. That there was, and actually it went into the royal tax stuff, how much water, each kind of province got based on the level of the Nile. Right, so they would measure the level of the Nile, and based on that, they would calculate how much each surrounding place would get of water. So it was a very, very important thing how high the Nile was and how well they had what's called a nilometer. I do not make this stuff up. A nilometer. Which would measure exactly what was happening, and at strategic points they'd know exactly how much water there was, and that went into the royal annals. Right.
Do all the rivers below the equator flow north? Is it because of just the Nile? Okay.
I'm not. Do we know why? I mean, do we know what that's about? Topography, just altitude?
Probably the altitude in the Sudan.
Did the irrigation system involve aqueducts?
Right, so there's lots of different ways you can carry water. But yes, it's a system of, making sure the water comes off the Nile and goes out so that you spread that water as far as possible in terms of crops. So we know when the Nile swells that everything, right, is groovy. How does Canaan get irrigated? Rain. So there is no relationship between a famine in Canaan and a famine in Egypt. They are two different weather systems. They are different. Right? There's a different thing at work. Bless you. And so that Torah conflates them, right, is interesting, but they are unrelated. In Egypt, we see, in Egypt, yes, we see that there are several kings of Egypt or leaders of Egypt who brag that there was a famine in Egypt and they got grain to their people. So this story doesn't come out of nowhere. We see lots of issues about water, lots of issues about the Nile, and we also see, we have Anktify, the great chieftain of Nechem, who recorded a 7-year famine in which the entire south of Egypt is said to have died of hunger, and people devoured their own children. So we've had that in Torah too, haven't we? Right? That one of the curses is that you will devour your own children. So this is clearly a motif that is referencing how terrible life conditions, right, can get and what happens when you have war and displacement and famine and all of that. He took pride in having foreseen the event caused by a low Nile, right? So they went to the Nilometer and said, wow, the Nilometer is very low. That then means that further down, right, that, that everybody out is not going to be getting the kind of water that they need to grow their crops. And so he had foreseen the event caused by a low Nile, and in having been able to rush grain, he took pride in that, and in being able to rush grain and loads of corn to various towns in order to alleviate the situation. So, right, so this is all over ancient Egyptian history. But what's interesting is if you look at Mesopotamia, we also have references to 7-year periods of drought. So in the Gilgamesh epic, for example, the sky god Anu threatens that 7 years of empty husks could occur, right, if people don't get it together. Right, so that's a punishment that the god is going to bring 7 years of empty husks. And from Ugarit, we also have a mention of Baal experiencing a 7-year failure as the god of rain and thunder. So this is a symbol that is absolutely part of the literature of the ancient world. What's going to make ours a little bit different, right, is that God gives Joseph the ability to see all of this, and then presumably Joseph has the sophistication and the wherewithal to figure out a plan, right? So our story always is going to reconstruct the local narratives to be about God in some way, and it's opposite the pagan one that's coming to describe, right, a failure of one of their gods, right? We can't have that, God forbid. Right, So always we know a little bit about what to expect about how the Israelites are going to reconstruct those stories. So this is not coming out of nowhere. Very much a part of the literature of the ancient world, of the ancient Near East. So let's look at this word for rations. I'm so glad you're here, Rita. I miss it when you're not here.
We all do.
I can't point to you and say, for instance, what's the word for rations?
I wouldn't know it except I read the Jewish Journal today. I wouldn't have known that one.
Great. All right. That's all right. Getting your Judaism from another source now. That's okay. All right. All right, so we're getting the word for rations, right? My markers are not, they're underperforming. So this shoresh, right. What does this shoresh generally mean? When we see shin, vet, resh, what do we usually think?
Broken.
Haha. The kal form of this word is break, right? So if we put it in PL, if we put it in the stronger form, we get shavar, and we talk then about smashing, shattering. So we have a couple of forms of this word. This is how most of us are used to seeing or understanding this word, is about breaking, or if it's in the PL form, then it's about like really breaking, right? Like smashing to smithereens, shattering, right? Lishbo, to break. So interesting that in our text this means rations. What is the connection? Aviva Zorenberg brings the connection that rations is about shavaring hunger or thirst. Right? So if there's an experience of hunger or thirst, if you break that, how do you break it? You break it with rations. So this is how she ties and of course she's always basing herself on scholarly work before her. I just quote her as the expert. All right, so interesting that this is the word, and usually we see this as a shin, right? Shavar, lishbor. Okay. So all the world comes to Joseph, and here we get a verb. Look at verse 57. B'chol haaretz, and all the land, ba'u mitzrayma, came to Egypt. Lishbor el Yosef. To
Right.
so right? Lishbor el Yosef, right? To rationify Yosef. Right? So it's an indirect El Yosef. They're doing it to Joseph. What are they doing? They are requesting rations. But it's a very interesting construction to have rations be a verb. Right? I don't know how to say that in English. You would have to say request rations. Rationing, but you don't rationing something. You ration food. We have it as a verb that involves the actual rations. We don't have an English verb for coming to request rations of someone.
No.
That's how Hebrew turns the noun rations into a verb.
But in the translation here it says to buy provisions.
Because we don't have a word. We have to have a bunch of English words because we don't have a word for what it means to come and request rations of someone. That's a lot of English to get it one.
Translate from any language.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but I care about Hebrew.
Yeah.
So,
Could there be a sense here when you ration something, you break it up?
Right.
So
if you've got a whole big thing.
Yeah, that's the
rationing
meaning
is
breaking
breaking
it
it up into
Okay.
pieces.
equal parts.
okay,
Because when you first said that was
where you
the
were.
first thing that came into my mind.
It also seems similar to like break fast.
Break fast, right? So you're breaking the fast. You're breaking the imposed fast, the involuntary fast. Right, exactly. So those words have been used together for a long time, right? Breaking fast.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, let's look at 42. Chapter 42.
When Jacob saw that there were food rations to be had in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you keep looking at one another? Now I hear," he went on, "that there are rations to be had in Egypt. Go down and procure rations for us there, that we may live and not die." So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to get grain rations in Egypt. For Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, since he feared that he might meet with disaster. Thus the sons of Israel were among those who came to procure rations, for the famine extended to the land of Canaan.
Okay. So Yaakov sees. What does he see? Yesh shever b'Mitzrayim. There's this in Mitzrayim. Vayomer Yaakov lefanav, and Yaakov says to his sons, Lama titra'u. So it's interesting. So Rita, tell me about this word at the end of verse 1. Titra'u.
It's like looking at each other.
So something about looking. Titra'u. It's kind of like y'all are looking, but it's unclear what kind of looking. You could, I guess, translate it as looking at each other, like, throwing up your hands, going, what are we going to do? And Jacob's like, knock it off, do something. Zornberg says it actually is about appearance. Why are you putting up appearances that everything's okay? Right? That it isn't about the act of looking, it's about the act of appearing. Because if you look at the Hebrew form, it's less about the verb to look, and it's more about the verb to appear. Vayera, right? Titra'u. Why are y'all appearing?
Well, we use that looking too for appearing. You're looking good, or you're looking happy today. It's an appearance.
You're looking like you have it all together.
Yeah.
Right. So
Translation in this book is staring, however,
interesting.
in the feminine book.
So grammar experts can fight it out. We get to leave it murky. and undecided. We don't have to take a stand. But it makes some sense, just kind of looking at the Hebrew form of it, it makes some sense that it's kind of like, why are you appearing? Meaning like you're appearing like everything's fine. It's kind of the same meanings implied. Like, what are you sitting around for? Like, this is terrible. Do something, right? Come up with a plan. And so Jacob, remember Jacob, who is broken by the death of Yosef. Here now comes back the patriarch, that we've seen, the guy who acts, the guy who has a plan, the guy who is going to save everybody and build a fortune. That's the Jacob we see for a moment here. And we're going to study together a midrash. That's a very interesting midrash about exactly this. We'll come back to it. So Yaakov says, I hear that there are rations to be had in Egypt. Right? Go down and get it, so that we may live and not die. So the 10 brothers went down to get grain rations in Egypt. Why 10?
Well, Joseph was already there, and Benjamin's not going. 12 minus
Benjamin
2.
is not going. Why is Benjamin not going?
It's not clear.
It's not clear.
Benjamin and Joseph are the only two sons of Rachel.
So presumably, Jacob doesn't want something to happen to Benjamin. But it's interesting that the text says, right, Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brother, since he feared that he might meet with disaster. We know that it's because he's Joseph's only full brother. We know he's the only surviving, in Jacob's mind, the only surviving son of Rachel.
It's interesting that they're saying Jacob all the time, Jacob and his sons, but when they get to going down, they suddenly say Joseph's brothers, not Jacob's sons. And so it sort of links them. They must have, maybe that's why they were staring at each other. They were scared to death that they might encounter Joseph. So they bring up Joseph.
Interesting. I find it interesting that he's Jacob, Jacob, Jacob until 5. Thus, the sons of Israel were among those who came to procure rations for the famine extended to the land of Canaan. Right? So now when we're talking about going down to Egypt, now it's the sons of Israel. Because the going down to Egypt is the beginning of the national story. Right? It's Israel we're dealing with once we're dealing with them in Egypt. Right? That's the beginning. This going down is the beginning of everything that then follows in terms of us coming. The next time we come out fully, right, with Joseph, right, it's as part of the Exodus, right? That when we are becoming a nation, when we're becoming a people.
And Jacob thought Joseph was dead.
Correct.
Right?
Correct. Which is. Okay, I want to go there yet, but which is interesting because when it says in the Torah text, Jacob, when they show him the coat dipped in blood, Jacob says at that point, the Torah says that he savar, he thought, another iteration of this shoresh, he thought that Joseph was dead. And this word savar, to think, in this sense, is often about thinking wrongly. So, right, again, a nuance of Hebrew that we don't have so much in English. You would use a word to modify thought. She thought mistakenly, right? It's interesting. The Hebrew has a word that's about, maybe there's one in English if I think long enough, but, right, but it is to assume something that's not true. All right. Misapprehend. There you go. Points for Laura. And thank you for using apprehend. Thank you so much. I cannot tell you. I've used the word, she didn't apprehend this, and people are just like, what are you talking about? That means to grab something. I'm like, it is to realize or to think or to understand something. Thank you, Laura. Don't you mean? No, I don't. I mean to apprehend, as in to understand. All right. So, 6.
Now Joseph was the vizier of the land. It was he who dispensed rations to all the people of the land, and Joseph's brothers came and bowed low to him with their faces to the ground. When Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he acted like a stranger toward them and spoke harshly to them. He asked them, "Where do you come from?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan to procure food." For though Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Recalling the dreams that he had dreamed about them, Joseph said to them, "You are spies. You've come to see the land in its nakedness." But they said to him, "No, my lord. Truly your servants have come to procure food. We are all of us sons of the same man. We are honest men. Your servants have never been spies." And he said to them, "No, you have come to the land to see the land in its nakedness." And they replied, "We, your servants, were 12 brothers, sons of a certain man in the land of Canaan. The younger, however, is now with our father, and one is no more." But Joseph said to them, "It is just as I have told you. You are spies. By this you shall be put to the test. Unless your youngest brother comes here by Pharaoh, you shall not depart from this place. Let one of you go and bring your brother, while the rest of you remain confined, that your words may be put to the test whether there is truth in you. Else by Pharaoh you are nothing but spies." And he confined them in the guardhouse for 3 days.
Okay. So they go down to Egypt. What happened to Joseph? What did they cause to have happen to Joseph?
He went down to Egypt.
He went down to Egypt
But then he
too.
rose.
How did he go down to Egypt?
He was sold
As a slave with nothing. How are they going down to Egypt? Same way, because what goes around comes right on around, right? So they go down with nothing. They go down as beggars. I mean, they have, but what good is it that you have, 6 Hummers and 3 mansions if you have no food or water or electricity going to it, right? Like they have, but they don't have, right? They have, but they're in desperate need. It's at the point of Jacob's talking about that we may live and we may not die. All right, why do all of them have to go? How come 1 or 2 don't go and take care of this? Huh?
There's a lot to carry.
What,
It's more like they're hostages.
If you're talking about
if it's rationed, what happens?
Split more ways.
10 people.
If it's rationed per capita. So you might be able to come get for your family, but you can't come get for all your cousins. If you've got 10 brothers and they all have children, those are all your cousins. You can't do that. If there's rations, you have to show up and personally beg from the vizier actually his other title is seller of corn. So you have to go present yourself to the seller of corn as head of household. So all 10 heads of household had to go down to procure rations for their families.
This is a little aside, but isn't 10 also a pretty godly number of the Sephra and the Midian? You need that 10 for
That's later. Kabbalah and stuff does stuff with 10 later. They pull it from Torah because Edah, the first time we see the word Edah, community used, it's used of the 10 spies. So, Edah is used for the first time. 10 must mean Edah. 10 must be the minimum you need for an Edah, for a community. That's a rabbinic conflation.
It's from this then.
Yeah, it's from Torah. It's from the spies. It's in the story of Exodus, right? When the scouts are sent out to scout the land. So when they come back, they're called an Edah when they report to the people, a community. So that's the least number we see associated with any word about community. And so the rabbis say, then that must mean you need a minimum of 10 to have an Edah.
The rabbis apprehended that.
They apprehended that from Torah. Whether they misapprehended or not is irrelevant for them. They make that connection. 10 is a number of a kind of unit. There is a recognition that 10 is kind of a unit, but 10 here is it's 12 minus 2 here. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's kind of the opposite. Like, 10 is not the right number. 10 are going down because 1 is being held back because of what was done to number 12 or 11, right? So, all right. So, Laura.
Question. Just sort of struck me when you're reading it, but I don't know if there's any significance how verse 11, when they say, "We are all of us sons of the same man," as though it could include Joseph also. We, they're talking to him. Is there any, does the Hebrew allow that sort of sense? That
A little irony.
Sure, yeah, because it's plural. It's just we plural.
Right, but speaking to him in a way
Right.
that they're telling.
I think, if anything, I think it's ironic. Right. I think
They don't know.
correct, because I think really in the story, I know you like, and it's fine if you want to write the other version where they know it's him. But really the drama of the story is that he is fully Egyptianized, and they have no idea that this is Joseph. But then for the all-knowing narrator to say, we are all sons of the same man,
Then it's kind of cool.
it's kind of cool, right? So that the narrator puts it that way, but I think that's only the omniscient narrator. They do not recognize Joseph. Remember, he has an Egyptian name. He's been given an Egyptian name. We see later in the story that he's talking to them through an interpreter. Joseph is speaking Egyptian through an interpreter who's interpreting the Semitic language for Joseph, who answers the interpreter in Egyptian. He has all of the trappings and garb of a very high-ranking Egyptian.
Plus, they thought he was a slave.
Right.
I mean, they had no reason to think that.
They would assume if he's still alive, he's not having a great time, right?
And he's really grown up since they.
And he was very young when he went down, and he's now a full-grown man. So all of those things together.
And it's so beautiful that he's in the position of knowing who they are.
That's what the whole story turns on, is that he recognizes them, and they don't recognize him. That is the whole pivot, right, on which the drama turns. And how he's going to use that. Mm-hmm. Oops. All right, so... Where were we?
But again, the translation and the woman's thing, it says they came to buy food.
Yes.
Which is a much different thing than coming for begging for food, or that other word.
He doesn't have to sell it to them. Egyptians are hungry. He doesn't have to sell his grain to Canaanites.
No, but if you come to buy, you're in a stronger, you think at least you're in a stronger position than if you come. The word beg, it wasn't in the other book, but some word was used.
Right. So that they're not destitute. You know, they have the means to pay. But it's like being in Russia and you have a lot of money to pay, but there's nothing on the shelves.
Yeah.
You know, they have to go ask Joseph to sell them some of Egypt's grain,
right,
while the Egyptians are starving.
Well, true, but to your point, I don't think the Egyptians were getting this grain free either. As I recall, they were buying it too with what they had,
Correct.
which was finally their land.
Correct.
So they ended up. The whole thing was a big sale.
Money grab.
Yes.
On behalf of the Pharaoh.
Yes.
Who ended up with all the land and all,
Yes.
Everything.
And sets up the conditions for Israelite slavery. Joseph sets up the conditions for Israelite slavery. But we're not going to go there.
But the fact that Joseph is the one who recognizes his brother, respects the tragedy of what happened to him when he was young, that he has certain memories that remain. And so he is the most sensitive and the most intelligent of all the brothers, which is nice.
I'm wondering how they got an audience with him.
Right? Well, clearly, if you have the means...
all of a sudden they're talking about big cheese here.
So they clearly have the means to come down and procure, and so the vizier is going to entertain the possibility. But he's also going to make sure that you're not coming to do any funny business in his plan, because he's not just the seller of grain. If he were just the seller of grain, that's all he would be dealing with. He accuses them of being spies, which means he has a higher position than the seller of grain. Right? His job is to protect the security of Egypt. That is a very high-ranking. He's head of the CIA. He's head of he's up there at the top.
Is it possible that Joseph instituted the rationing? Because
he did. He did. We know he did.
Okay.
When he interprets Pharaoh's dreams, Pharaoh says that you handle this. And he gives him that signet ring and the big gold wrapper, necklace, and he says, you handle it. And Joseph sets up a whole system of rationing.
That's got to be a great plus for whoever did it. Because
For sure. But like Robert pointed out, he didn't say, bring all your good grain, while the 7 years of bumper crops are happening. Yes, I'm very much influenced by the Broadway musical. 7 years of bumper crops are on the way, right? So the 7 years of bumper crops, I know every word. Don't even get me started. We did it in fourth grade. And so he has them bring stuff, and then he's going to ration it back out. But like Robert said, he sells it to them. And he winds up having them sell their land to buy grain, thereby putting all of the land in Pharaoh's hands.
Part of the subtext here is that God is in the middle of this whole thing. Because when Joseph remembers his dream, which ostensibly came from God, there's a sense that there's a much bigger forces moving here than just these people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any reason to know differently, but is this motivation here that he wants to see Benjamin? Does it go into that?
There's several motives here. But chief among them is they left Benjamin on purpose. He knows why they left Benjamin. He knows it's the only other son of Rachel. He knows his father was bereft of him. So he knows why Benjamin's been left behind. So he sets it up that they have to bring Benjamin down. Right. And he's trying to see, will they treat Benjamin the way they treated him? What will they risk Benjamin? Right? And he sets Benjamin up. We're not at that part. That's next year's. You have to come next year for that part of the story. Job security. So he sets Benjamin up. He puts his goblet, his own divining goblet, in Benjamin's sack and then sends them all home. Right? He's going to send them home, but he's planted something on Benjamin so that he can accuse Benjamin and say, for this he dies, and then see what the brothers do. Right? So he sets up quite the drama here. Yeah? But like I said, we're not going to get to that part. So what we are going to get to is this wonderful midrash brought to us by the great Aviva Zornberg. Her book is called The Beginning of Desire. Okay? So when we think the beginning of desire, we tend to think about a spark of something good, right? And it is. But she's going to quote someone who says, and this is where the title of her book comes from. Her book is called The Beginning of Desire. That's what this is taken from. It's her commentary on Genesis. How does she get that title? She gets that title from the quote, and I forgot to write down the source. Not to have is the beginning of desire. Not to have is the beginning of desire. She quotes infant development specialists. I'm telling you, the woman, I think she remembers she must have a photographic memory. She quotes infant development specialists who say, people who are constantly giving infants stuff miss the point of development. The infant has to experience boredom and a lack, so that out of that arises a desire for something. Oh, there's a shiny object, but until there's a lack, until there's boredom, if you keep giving the the infant stuff, they don't develop the missingness that then drives them to fulfill their own longing, their own desire for something.
Wow, that theory needs to come out more.
Right? Because you have to let them get bored and let them start looking around to fill their own desire. We don't allow infants to have desire. We don't allow them to experience the beginning of desire because we don't allow them to experience lack. And it is crippling.
Yes.
To development. What did we see about we are all sons of the same man? But one of us, what?
Yes. What a powerful.
Huh?
Is no more.
Is no more. But one, enenu. Is not. Enenu. Ein means there isn't. Lack. Ein is lack. Ein, there isn't. If you say to me, do you have some money I can borrow? I say ein. Ainly. Ainly kesef. I don't have any money.
Ein Kelohenu.
Ein Kelohenu. There is none like our Elohenu, our God, right? Ein. So, and in Kabbalah it becomes a huge deal. They're put against each other. Yesh and ayin. There is and there isn't, right? Those are huge categories. Nothing, capital N, right? Becomes a huge idea in Jewish mysticism. But Zornberg is quoting the beginning of Desire, the whole identity of Joseph. Her chapter is brilliant. Her chapter is on Joseph. She identifies Joseph's entire experience about being enenu, is notness.
Where is she?
And she,
Where does she live?
She's British.
Okay.
So she says Joseph his whole experience is about enenu, and it's echoed earlier by who? And I guess the patriarch.
Abraham?
Who said it? Yitzchak.
Oh, Isaac.
Isaac, who Sarah thinks in the Midrash, enenu, is dead. In the Midrash, remember, Satan comes and tells Sarah, your husband took your only kid and offered him as a sacrifice on the mountain. So, and then we see Sarah dies, right? So the Midrash is saying it kills her. The belief that Yitzchak is gone, and that in some ways Yitzchak is gone. Like, what happens to someone laying there with your father with the knife raised ready to kill you, right? Something snaps, like something, right? So, but Joseph is really paradigmatically enenu. He isn't. Okay. Let's look at page 301 of Zornberg, which it looks like this. Yes, it does. On the top right-hand corner, it says page 300. A left hand. So on the right, I don't know. All right, look at the right-hand column of page marked 300. Yes, shever sever. Yeah. Okay. The dialectical vision. We're going to look at this midrash. She says a kind of twilight zone between despair and hope is evoked by the expressions of loss, of not being, right? Enenu, of not being in the narrative. Radically ambiguous, enenu closes and opens avenues of speculation. Just this dialectical tension is the subject of a central midrash on the narrative. Here's the midrash. Jacob saw that there were food rations to be had in Egypt, right? That comes from our text that we just read. Happy is he whose hope is in the Lord his God. What's the word for hope? They change from a sin to a shin. Sever is hope, and shever is breaking or rations. But let's put rations in parentheses. Let's stay with sever is hope, and shever is stuff missing, right? Because actually it's not, in this case, it's not break, right? That's where it derives from. But we decided shever was about there being a lack that has to be addressed,
and in Torah,
right? A broken condition. In that sense, something that the whole condition is broken, severely broken, life-threateningly broken. All right.
And in Torah, there's no dot, so the two words look identical.
Correct, absolutely correct. And there's no vowels. So what is the Midrash doing? The Midrash is pulling a verse from Psalms. This is what the rabbis do. This is what they do all day. They sit in a yeshiva and they do this all day. For them, this is love play. Okay? This is not, because people often read this who don't know Midrash, and they read it and they go, Really? That is such a stretch. That's been said in here a few times. I'm just saying. That is such a stretch. They're stretching, but they know they're stretching. But they're stretching out of love. These two words, if God gave them to us, they must be connected. How is the verse in Psalms where we see these same letters meaning hope? How is that connected to Genesis where those same letters mean rations because people are starving? There has to be a connection. God loves us. It's our job to figure out what's God trying to tell us. And they play this game all day long. And if you've memorized all of these texts, right, and even you do it in here now, you're like, wait, wasn't there something about that word in the creation there? Oh, yes, there was. So believe me, there's a midrash that connects them, right? So if we can open our hearts and minds to just seeing this as loving play with Torah, yes, they're going to stretch, but let's see what they do. It's like a game of Twister. Is it normal? No. Is it fun? Yes. For the most part, until the next day for some of them. All right. So they take the verse from Psalms. Happy is he whose hope, sever, is Adonai, his God. Right? Okay, so that's two. Here comes another pairing. Whatever he tears down cannot be rebuilt. When God destroyed the plan of the tribes, it was not rebuilt. Whomever he imprisons cannot be set free. These are the 10 tribes who traveled to and from Egypt and did not know that Joseph was alive. But to Jacob, it was revealed that Joseph was alive. To your reading, Laura, always. Jacob knew, according to the Midrash, that Joseph was alive. As it is said, you ready for this? Jacob saw that there was shever in Egypt. There was shever, brokenness. That is the famine. There was sever, hope. That is the plenty. There's famine, but there's also been plenty. There was shever, brokenness. Quote, Joseph was taken down to Egypt, right? It broke Jacob's heart. There was sever, hope. Joseph became the ruler. There was shever, brokenness. They shall enslave and afflict them. And there was sever, hope. In the end, they shall go free with great wealth. All right, so the Midrash has taken 3 pairings of shever connected to sever.
And it is a balance.
Three pairings of there's brokenness and there's hope. Okay? She's not going to leave that alone. Right? Turn to the other side. Go down to the paragraph that says the relation of shever to sever. The relation of shever to sever, of brokenness to hope, is not, however, merely sequential. Jacob does not merely see an end to the suffering and a new phase of prosperity. Indeed, the historical order of the plenty and the famine does not allow of such an optimistic reading. The Midrash, in fact, reverses the order to adjust it to the conceptual scheme of brokenness and hope. In other words, to make that pairing work, there's brokenness, but there's hope. It said there's famine, but there were years of plenty. Well, that's not how it happened. The years of plenty came first. Then there was famine, but the Midrash is going to flip them. What Jacob sees is a dialectical vision of shever/sever. When things fall apart, the opportunity for sever arises. Before such a crisis, in a condition of wholeness and security, hope is irrelevant. After it, some plausible reconstruction of the shards becomes essential. The beginning of desire. Hope, sever, is irrelevant when everything is fine. This is sever, the word for hope. The Midrash quotes this from Psalms. It's immediately related to the idea of shattering, of crisis. It is also related to the notion of thought, of plausible opinion. Svara, as we have noticed, because she's quoted it somewhere else, is a plausible interpretation. It is the conventional Talmudic expression for thinking, for speculation, ingenuity in constructing a pleasing hypothesis. Thinking, I love where she goes. So part of this word we saw is about thinking, right? And we've talked about it can also mean thinking mistakenly, right? Thinking is an act of trust. There are no guarantees that one is right in one's interpretation. Savor is often used, in fact, to describe a mistaken opinion. As we have just seen, Jacob savar that Joseph was dead. To think, then, is to respond with a kind of courage to the evidence, the surfaces of reality. To hope, likewise, is to dare to trust the more cheerful facets of a shattered condition. To think is to trust. It's to take the surfaces of reality and be willing to risk interpreting. If thinking is a risk, what is sharing that in a room of 35 people? And this is what Jews do for fun. This is what we've always done. We sit around, we read, we think, we reflect, and then we share it out loud. We're going to let somebody else decide what they think about our interpretation of reality. That's crazy town. That's us. We're nuts. And we love this. And it's about leaning into hope. She made a connection for me that I never thought of. Why is this us? Because we've suffered so much. I believe, I don't know, I have to think it through a little bit more, but I got some instinctive connection that it's how we hoped. Does that make sense? She's making that thinking is an act of trust. And then you're going to share that, right? And if that's your activity, isn't that a way of leaning into hope?
And it's centuries old.
To keep risking. And it's centuries old because that's our history. We've needed to be hopeful because we've had to live into the more cheerful facets of a shattered condition forever as a people.
Well, there's a choice.
There's a choice.
Or to lean into despair and the brokenness.
Yes.
Or otherwise, we as a people wouldn't be here now.
We 100% would not be sitting in this room. 100%. If we hadn't done this, we would not be sitting in this room. Or we'd be sitting in this room doing something other than reading this text and applying it to how to live lives of righteousness and goodness and compassion, right? So what Jacob sees then is the necessary relation between disaster and hope. He sees the condition of the bull. What's the bull? The pit. Right? That's happened a lot in our story, right? He sees the condition of the bull of emptiness, disappearance, loss as generating a hopeful hypothesis. The fundamental polarity of disaster and hope is thus expressed in the single word, shever, as the Midrash reflects it. The two concepts are related by an inner dialectic. They are simultaneous. Because without disaster, hope is irrelevant. You only have hope if there's a shattered condition. They are simultaneous. This, the Midrash affirms, is what is, quote, revealed to Jacob. He must act on the basis of hope, of a vision of life in death. He may turn out to be mistaken, but that is the nature of the shever world into which Joseph has disappeared. Not to have is the beginning of desire.
That is so beautiful.
Just saying.
And not only for a people, for an individual.
And
comes
what is the connection to Hanukkah? Not only for a people, but for the world.
light.
Right? We are called to live into hope. And hope is irrelevant unless it's dark. That Chanukiah, if you put it in a really bright place, doesn't do so much. You put that Chanukiah in a place where it's really dark, And the light shines and it dispels a bunch of darkness. Light and dark, by the way, scientifically someone just told me this the other day, cannot exist in the same place at the same time. So lighting a menorah, lighting a Chanukiah, you actually disallow darkness to exist in that space. When we live into hope, when we light just one little flame, we don't allow darkness to exist in that one little place. It may be everywhere else, but in that one place, it cannot exist. It becomes impossible. And that's when we're called to the light the Chanukiah, when it's darkest. Right? The darkest lunar month. Bert's heard this 35 times already this week. It's the danger of being too close to a rabbi around a holiday. Sorry. We light the Chanukiah at the darkest lunar month. This is the darkest lunar month, right? And when's the new moon? Is the last day of the month. Is the new moon. That's when the moon is darkest. Right? We're at day 25 when we start Hanukkah. We are moving in to the darkest moon of the year. The darkest month, the darkest moon. That's when we light the Chanukiah. Not when the light comes back. That is not Jewish, people. Celebrating the return of the light, the birth of the sun, S-O-N, right? The return of the S-U-N. That is not Jewish. We don't wait for evidence that the light's coming back. We don't wait to see it happen. We don't wait and say, oh, yay, now it's here. That's not what Jews do. Jews are about shever. We're about the world is dark. It is broken. And we are called every night to light another tiny flame of sever, of hope. And when we do that night after night after night, we have a blazing Chanukiah that dispels an incredible amount of darkness. And if that is not a message that we need right now in our time, I don't know what is, right? It is easy to despair. It is easy to get cynical and to say there's nothing I can do, right? That is the simple way to go. But Jews don't do it the easy way, right? We just don't. We believe we have to act. We don't wait for the light. We act. We light those flames. We create hope. That will eventually dispel darkness. But we have to do it over and over and over again.
Oh, it just occurred to me that the election in Alabama was the first night of Hanukkah.
That was my Hanukkah present. First night of Hanukkah present. The election in Alabama.
This makes me think of the youth in the Warsaw Ghetto who were studying Hebrew and planning to go to Israel.
And their teachers,
yes,
who held classes every day as they sat freezing on the floor, starving, terrified. Teachers held classes every day and kept them on a schedule. And you were in trouble if you didn't show up. Because that's how we live into Sever. No matter what, no matter how evil whatever it is we're facing is, that's how we've survived. Is that we choose to live into Sever. And how we do it generally is, right, thinking and sharing those thoughts. They were just learning Hebrew. They were learning Hebrew texts, poetry. Like they were reflecting on things. And yes, they were being taught skills and all of that as well, the language itself and the mechanics of it. But they were being taught the language in which we think as Jews, the language with which we engage, because they were raising kids to demonstrate what Zornberg calls the risk of thinking. Because what kind of courage that takes in those kind of circumstances is unbelievable. But that's true courage. And that's, we don't celebrate the Maccabees so much. We haven't talked about the Maccabees in forever, right? The rabbi said about the Maccabees. Who do you think has the whole story about them finding one cruse of oil? Who do you think that was?
Christians, it's got to be.
That was the rabbis. The rabbis wrote that midrash. That's a midrash. They came in and there was one little cruse.
They made up a myth.
They made up a myth. Because they didn't want to be dealing with the Maccabees and the war and the guerrilla warfare. First of all, they were living under Rome, so they could not be celebrating a national holiday where you overthrow the ruling authorities and celebrate that, right? That's just stupid, right? That's just dangerous. That's dumb. So they couldn't on some level risk that. But on the other hand, that's not what they were about. They didn't really, oh yay, the Jews won. We beat them up, we threw them out. It didn't resonate. What resonated was the reality the rabbis lived in, which is we are not in control. We don't have power. Rome has power, and Rome is horrible and filthy and corrupt and vicious and the antithesis of everything Torah tells us we're supposed to build in a society. That's the reality they were living with. They needed that to be the same thing we needed to be, that Chanukiah. The rabbis lived in the world we live in. We have way more power than they did. But we live in the same reality they were confronting. They needed the stories to be about light and about hope and about lighting one cruse of oil. If you're going to have an 8-day festival to rededicate the temple, if we just stop for 1 second, there was one cruse of oil. How long was it supposed to last? Why do you plan an 8-day festival when you don't have enough oil for 8 days? No one ever asks that question. It's so, but really? Because we've accepted the story. But really, why did they light one cruse? Why didn't they wait until there was enough oil to light the menorah for the entire 8 days of the festival? Because it's a Jewish story. They didn't wait. They lit it anyway. Sever. They lit one cruse anyway. And only in doing that, only in lighting it when there was zero evidence that was a good idea, only in doing that was the miracle made possible. If they'd have waited, they would have had 8 days, it would have been a festival, whoop, whoop, let's remember the dedication of the day. Okay, but you don't create the possibility of miracles that way. The only way you open up an opportunity for something miraculous to happen is to light it anyway. So that's our job, right? To not wait until it's all copacetic to act. We have to act now when it's darkest. And that is the way we open up the possibility of the miraculous occurring in this world.
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday morning Torah study from Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.